Thank you very much for joining us this evening for what I expect to be a very special conversation, and there will be plenty of time for questions from the audience as well. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here with Sir David Attenborough, whose career spans these incredible decades where television started off as an experiment in London and then blossomed into this wonderful thing. And Sir David has brought natural history into the homes of each and every one of us in a way that nobody else has done. So welcome this evening, Sir David. We're going to start with a clip from one of your very early series. And we'll watch that, and then we'll think about how television has changed over the intervening decades.
Hardly science, I suppose.
But absolutely wonderful. I mean, this was Zoo Quest, wasn't it? Which is this actually very long-running series spanning nearly 10 years in the 50s through to the 60s. And I think we look at it now and realise that a lot of things have changed in the intervening decades about the way we make television. But one of the really striking things, of course, is that it's made in black and white, and you had to describe the animals that you were looking at.
Yes, both television and zoology, if I may say so, have changed hugely since that time, and zoos. What happened was that the first television programs about animals were live animals in the studio, poor wretched creatures that had come from the Regent's Park, been stuffed in a sack, taken up to Alexandra Palace, and then with lights they were then put on a table on a doormat, and the chap from the zoo would then say, well, this is a sloth or this is an anteater or whatever, and try to make sense of it, as it were. Because we didn't have enough money for film, and so the only animal programs were those live ones. And they had their quality, I mean, because the animal with luck escaped or went down the producer's front or did something unspeakable. But it wasn't a great way of actually doing any science or showing what animals really were like. And you could only do that, I thought, as a producer at the time, if you actually set the ecological setting of the animal. So it had to go out there, and I persuaded the BBC to let us use 16mm film, which of course is quite narrow film compared with the 35mm, which everybody else and the BBC then use. And the BBC were very reluctant to do that because of quality. But however, we did, and we latched on to the zoo, which was sending out an expedition to collect animals. And of course, zoos don't do that these days. I mean, but in those days, 60 years ago, if an animal died, oh, well, that was okay. All flesh is mortal, you know, so we'll go out and get another one. And the idea that you had some responsibility to breed things in the zoos was not widely accepted. And the London Zoo at the time, the Zoological Society of London, after all, the scientific society, it measured its success by how many different species it had in captivity. It was the last lap of taxonomy, as you might say, the cataloguing of the animals in the world. And the zoos, that was what the London zoos saw that as its job. Those programs consisted of, first of all, a sequence like that, in which the curator of mammals and reptiles, Jack Lester, who you saw holding it, would then appear in the studio with this animal and explain what he could about it before we went back and did another sequence on film. But it was not much good as science, to be truthful.
And completely different approaches to conservation, I think, than we have today. And zoos have changed very much in that respect as well.
Well, it seems odd, but you know, I don't think 60 years ago anybody had heard the word conservation very much. I think you would be regarded as being a slightly specialist, I wouldn't say crank, but slightly odd if you were concerned about suggesting that human beings might exterminate a species. In spite of the fact that we know that they had done already, they exterminated the dodo, they'd exterminated the moas, they'd exterminated a lot of things, but by and large, people didn't think that the natural world was in danger. And it wasn't we were on the cusp. Just about after that, people like Peter Scott began to realise that there were some animals he knew about that were in danger of disappearing altogether, and it was man's fault. So it was just at that beginning that conservation started coming to people's consciousness.
It's interesting how different it was. I've seen a clip of you on one of the ZooQuest films, I think, digging up a turtle's nest and getting the eggs out and eating them for breakfast.
Of course. That was the BBC T&D, the BBC expenses were very, very small.
Oh, they were back then too? Yeah.
They taste terrible, I don't mind telling you. Yes, but it didn't occur to me that, everybody else was. That was on a beach in Java, and the local villagers were digging them up and eating them. And it didn't occur to me that turtles were in danger, not at all. But if you ever do it, don't put too much salt on. It's terribly salty to start with.
Salty already. So I really wanted to ask you what inspired you to take up this career. Was there somebody in particular that inspired you to become a naturalist, and particularly to spread that enthusiasm for the natural world?
I think every child born on this planet, up to the age of about 4 or 5, is fascinated by the natural world. I take kids out and turn over a stone, and the child would say, "Oh, look, a slug! What a treasure!" And he's right. What an extraordinary thing. What are these things on its head? How does it see? What does it feed on? And so on. And all kids feel that way. And if we deprive them, if they don't, it's because we deprive them of the opportunity. And it's a terrible thing that 50%, over half the world's population is urbanized to some degree, according to the United Nations. And the thought that children may grow up without looking at a pond, or without knowing how plants grow, or all those simple things that one used to. So, so all children have it. I certainly have it. And of course, there's you learn others, you grow up, you learn other things and other excitements and so on. But if you lose that delight and joy and intoxication with the natural world, you've lost something hugely precious. As to what inspired me to make things, I can't say I was inspired, but I remember going to the cinema in about 1934 or something like that, when I was 8, and seeing a chap called Cherry Kearton, who was a Yorkshireman, who made some of the first films of wildlife, and presented them as shorts in the cinema, the little extra bits that you had apart from the main film that ran about 20 minutes. And he appeared in a pit helmet and puttees and on a small island in South Africa where there are penguins. And he very starchy delivery and so on, but he was a pioneer. He was a great chap. Should be better known.
Did you look at him and want to be him?
Oh, I would have given anything, yes, of course. But it seemed such a remote possibility, as I'd never really thought it was possible.
So it wasn't something you set your heart on and
doggedly
pursued?
I couldn't aim to do television programs. There wasn't any television, 1930s, no television. So I couldn't have had that ambition. And I thought I was going to be a scientist and a biologist. And I went to university, but it was at the end of the war, and I had to go. When I finished my degree, I had to go into the Navy for 2 years. And when I came out of the Navy, rightly or wrongly, as you are in your sort of mid-20s and so on, I didn't want to go on a grant, and I thought it was time I earned my living. And I wasn't too sure, to be absolutely truthful, in front of this rather distinguished audience. It's a confession, but I wasn't sure I had what it took to be a research scientist, to be truthful.
So what did you do?
I went into publishing, and that was terrible. I cannot tell you how awful it was. My job was in publishing in those days. You counted letters in the words, and you counted words, and if you made an alteration, it was a farthing, and so you could cross out comma or something, and on a good day you could put a semicolon in or something if you're feeling strong. But that's about all. And after 2 years, I thought, this isn't what I was designed to do. I can't do this. And I saw a job advertised in the Times for a radio producer at the BBC. And I applied for it, and I got a rejection. I didn't even get an interview. And then about a week after that, I got a letter from someone who said, we know that you applied for this job and you didn't get it, but we're starting a new thing up in Alexander Palace in North London. And a lot of people are very rude about it, but we think it could come to something. It's called television. Would you like to come along and see whether you'd be interested in doing it? Amazing. And so I went up, and I thought it was just fabulous. There were these 2 studios. I mean, not one of them was barely bigger than about the size of this stage, you know. And from that, all television in Western Europe came, and it was all live. There was no way of recording it. And it was on television, it was on your sets for about 3 hours a night, and that was it. But it was so exciting. The programs, of course, were terrible. but at least the ones I did, but there were some extraordinary people there. They produced Hamlet, you know. They produced Pagliacci. They produced all kinds of things out of these 2 tiny little studios, all live. And if something went wrong, a little thing came up with a picture of a caption saying, I'm awfully sorry, but we've got a bit of a problem. We hope to sort it out. Maybe stay with us. It might be 10 or 20 minutes.
And you couldn't switch over?
No, nowhere else. Nowhere else. That was all it was. Yeah.
So when you started, were you doing wildlife right from the very beginning? Or was it
No, I
factual?
did politics. I did programs on knitting.
Right, okay, yeah.
Political discussions, short stories, a quiz, an archaeological quiz called Animal, Vegetable, Mineral. And I did one program with Julian Huxley because I thought that zoo program I described of live animals was really not doing animals justice. You know, they all look like oddities. They look like bizarre, strange things, whereas you and I and all you know perfectly well that animals aren't oddities. Animals actually in their own environment are wonderful answers to very complex questions. And so how could we do a program in which we could emphasize that? And I wrote a series called The Pattern of Animals, showing, and we did 3 programs about the way animals were modified for their environment physically, and the way they look. And we did one on camouflage, and we did one on aggression, and we did one on courtship. And Julian Huxley sat at a table reading his script. He wasn't doing that in this business of trying to make it up as he goes along. I think it was my script to be absolutely truthful. But anyway, he was reading it, and we had all these animals in various cages around the studio, live. And as a consequence of that, I persuaded people to let me go to ZooQuest.
So at that point, were you interested in taking an evolutionary approach? Because I think that's a really fascinating thing about your programs, is that actually from quite an early point, that evolutionary theme was in there.
It wasn't in ZooQuest. In ZooQuest, it was they were all tied to expeditions to catch animals and put in the London Zoo. So you caught what you found. And the only reason I appeared was that the man from the zoo, a lovely man called Jack Lester, who was in that clip, after the first program, live program, became very ill and was taken to hospital for a tropical disease, which in the end was fatal. And the head of television said, well, the program's got to go on next week. It was a series of 6. Attenborough, you're the only man who was, the only other person who was there, so you do it. And so I left the control gallery and came down and did stuff on the floor. Staff no fee, they said in those days at the BBC. You couldn't get extra money for that. That's what your job was. And then the second program, the second series, I had to do it also from the beginning. So that was the only reason I ever appeared.
So that was your lucky break, in a way.
My second?
Your second?
The second series.
No, sorry, your lucky break.
Oh, yeah. A lucky break.
Yeah.
Oh. unbelievable. I mean, it's a sort of classic, isn't it, in showbiz? That's what the prima donna breaks down and you get your chance and you go on and you're very nervous and you don't know whether you can remember the part and so on. Well, that was like me, yeah, very much.
So at that point where you were suddenly in front of the camera, did you think, this is what I want to do, and I'm good at this, I'm good at explaining things to an audience, or I'm going to go back behind the camera and carry on producing?
No, I mean, because it would take you 3 months to do a trip in Paraguay or somewhere, and then another 3 months of putting it together. That left another 6 months in which I went back to doing my job as a normal television producer, and I produced political broadcasts and so on. And the following year, they allowed me out again to do another one, and we did 10 of those until then. Eventually, I was asked to go and become an administrator. I became controller of BBC Two, which was a new network that started. And that was television by that time was of age. I mean, it was we had all the recording apparatus and so on. It was still on a line system, a 405 line. It was an extremely coarse picture, but BBC Two was introduced to produce a higher definition, a 625 line, which is what I did. And I did that for 8 years, and then I thought it wasn't as much fun as making programmes, so I went back to doing programmes.
But you commissioned some astonishing series while you were controller of BBC Two. I mean, this is the time when we had Civilization, Kenneth Clarke's Civilization, and Bronowski's Ascent of Man.
Yeah, well, if we hadn't, I should have been shot, really, because the BBC Two was a wonderful place where you could actually learn how to test out ideas, because only a small population, the percentage of the population could see them, because you had to buy a different set, and in any case we had to build a completely new chain of transmitters to do the new high definition filming transmissions. So you had this job of a new network with right budgets for the program, but hardly any viewers. So because technically they couldn't see it. And so I could make all sorts of interesting, exciting and novel and experimental things. And if nobody turned on and saw it, nobody noticed very much, and the press didn't notice very much. And so I could risk all sorts of things. And I risked Civilization, yes, and I risked Bronowski's Ascent of Man. And those were two which success. I won't tell you the ones that were disaster, but they were successful, and so it's boasting on my part to speak about them, but they were.
And of course, Civilization came in as we got colour television, so suddenly we could see the roof of the Sistine Chapel in colour. Just wonderful. I mean, over that 6 years, you've described it as being the golden age of broadcasting.
I never said that.
Did you not say that?
No, I wouldn't.
But in terms of, somebody put those words in your mouth, and it was probably a producer. But in terms of technological developments, in terms of the technological advances that you've seen over the course of your career and the impact that those have had, I mean, there have been some astonishing advances.
Yes, I mean, I suppose if you had to pick one, it would be the shift away from film onto electronic television, to electronic cameras. That's not just that they're high quality and so better quality. They were more sensitive. You didn't have to carry piles of film around. But there were also other more complicated things, like you could use them. You could put a camera up there only that big and on a bird's nest, and you could transmit images down to you on the ground. It made all sorts of things possible, and transformed natural history filmmaking, really.
I mean, being able to go inside termites' nests with optical probes,
yes,
and
exactly.
see that kind of detail.
Exactly so.
And I think that actually, interestingly, natural history filmmaking has been at the cutting edge of the science as well. You know, it's got people into places that perhaps they hadn't got to before that point. So there have been some real discoveries, some real research coming out of making the films.
Yes, and of course, television natural history filmmakers would all acknowledge the fact that they really simply couldn't do what they do without scientists. I mean, if you've got a project, you go and find the scientist who's researching that particular species, and he'll tell you all sorts of things. So from that point of view, the science is and the natural history filmmaker collaborating enabled us to make the content more serious scientifically. On the other hand, we sometimes affect scientists too. I may be exaggerating a bit, so you must allow me to suggest this, but if you're telling a story in television, as you know, in television films, it's very tempting to personalize an animal and make it one little story. And we soon learned that well, the first one that was done, the people foolishly, yes, I can say that, carelessly anyway, decided they would tell a story of a Cape hunting dog. Now, the one thing you know about Cape hunting dogs as biologists is that they are extraordinarily varied in their coloration. Some have a blotch on the face, they have spots on the side. Everyone is different, easily seen so. And it soon became clear when they were producing this story that actually what they were doing was using lots of different animals and pretending it was the same, because the colorations had changed. However, we put that right. And to start with, biologists said, oh, this fascination with one little individual and telling his story and so on is just television storytelling. But they began to realize that actually that was a new way to understand behavior, that looking and following the fortune of one particular individual animal could be very revealing and have all kinds of implications into the ecology and the general behavior of a group of animals.
That is fascinating, because I suppose as long as you're doing both at once, as long as you're doing studies on a population level, but complementing that with looking at individual lives, then the two things paint a much richer picture, actually, of that particular animal. How else do you think the style has changed over time? Do you think there's a different balance now between this storytelling aspect and the informing and the educating aspect of television?
Yeah, there are all those kinds of films to be made. I mean, it would be absurd to suggest that there's just one style which is the one that should be the chosen style. There are all these different ways of doing it. There are the ecosystems, there are the behavioral studies, there are general working out of how a community of animals lives with other different kinds of species and so on. But the other big change that has taken place is that now, you see, so many people can take television pictures, very good pictures. And there are people all around the world who are taking first-rate, transmittable pictures of rare species that no one's ever seen before. And I mean, just to give one example, not this recent program, but another series early on called Life, and of course, Life Story. Yeah. I had been sent to me by a chap who was an amateur in New Zealand who had discovered a tiny little spider as small as my little fingernail, which he invented the name, he called them a peacock spider because the abdomen is inflatable. And when the male sees the female, it suddenly cocks up its abdomen, inflates it, and it is as colourful as a peacock's tail. And each species is different, with wonderful colours in it. Now, he filmed those. It's quite a technical, difficult thing to do, you know, the thing that big. He filmed and sent that film to me and said, is this of interest? And I sent it to the Natural History Unit in Bristol and said, look, this guy is obviously on some extraordinary thing which nobody's ever seen before. This spiders that big, courtship displays. And in Bristol, in the Natural History Unit, it didn't immediately make someone say, "Oh, we'll make a film about it," but it lodged in the corporate mind, as it were. And when they started planning a series on courtship, of course, there it was. So out they go. But his film was absolutely as good as anything we could do.
And that was your latest series, wasn't it? That was the series that went out in October last year, Life Story.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I remember that little dancing peacock spider.
Extraordinary.
Fantastic. There is some amazing animal behaviour in that, and I think quite a bit that hadn't been seen before, or at least hadn't been captured on film before. And one of the ones that really stood out for me was the pufferfish creating its castle, its sand castle under the sea.
Astounding. And that, again, that didn't come from a scientist. That actually came from a Japanese underwater swimmer who was a good observer and so on, and sent us these photographs. For anyone who didn't see it, it's a small pufferfish. It's only about that big, and it creates a pattern in the mud, a symmetrical radial pattern, rather like a chrysanthemum, with ridges and lines like spokes which go out. Very, very complicated thing, which it takes him days to do. And that's entirely a total courtship display for the female. And if that had been sent to me with just like that, I would say, you're not kidding me. Come on, I recognise computer imaging when I see it, you know.
Or at least somebody making it very beautifully under the water. Yeah.
But it was real. I mean, and of course we sent out a crew and filmed it, and it had millions on the internet. I mean, people were just mind blown by it.
I think there's a bit of me that I find it extraordinary that we still are discovering new aspects of behaviour of animals actually that we know quite well.
It may be extraordinary, which it certainly is, but one of the things is it's very exciting, isn't it? I mean, it is thrilling that we can find new things all the time.
Now, we're finding new things all the time, but I think that over the decades, and particularly going back to that earlier ZooQuest clip, we've obviously had a big change in the way that we think about conservation and the way that we think about our own impact on the natural world. And I've been interested to see that in your recent series, those kind of themes have come more to the fore. So did that come from you, Sir David? Is that your own kind of personal interest in conservation and our impact on the natural world? Yes.
I mean, it certainly was not imposed upon me. And as you will know, you don't get messages from upstairs. The Director General doesn't send you a message to say, emphasise such and such. And the wonderful thing about the BBC is that the individual producers have extraordinary freedom of action. They make the programmes the way they want to make it. Subsequent, if they're unpopular or they don't think they're very good, I mean, somebody upstairs may say, look, I don't like this too much. But by and large, what you put in is what you suggest. That's your experience, I'm sure, and mine too. But when it comes to conservation, 20 years ago, 20 years, where are we now, or more, 30 years ago. 30 years ago, you know, people weren't at all sure about whether, in fact, the climate was changing and whether, in fact, human beings were having a deleterious effect upon the Earth. And so, although you might privately believe that, the BBC would say, if it came to it, would say, look, we're not axe grinders, you know. We are not propagandists. If you're doing a scientific program, you've got to be absolutely sure of what you're talking about. And so it wasn't initially. I was doing a program about, I don't know, an ecological program. That was what it was about. But eventually, when the science became absolutely cast iron, which is 30 years ago, that you're absolutely certain that we were having an effect on the human beings, on the climate, and that animals are disappearing as a consequence, then it was possible for us to say so, and to do so, which we have been doing so for 30 years, really.
And do you now see that as a really important part of what natural history broadcasting is about?
Very, very much so. I mean, the United Nations recently said that over 50% of the human population of this planet was now urbanized. So that means half of people on Earth are, to some extent, greater or less, cut off from the natural world. And there are a significant number of people who never see the natural world and never see a truly wild animal, unless it's a rat or a pigeon, maybe. But that's all. And yet, the effect of human beings on the natural world is greater now than it ever has been. And we, all human beings, all part of of this ecosystem, and we all are reacting to it. If we damage the natural world, we damage the thing which gives us oxygen to breathe and which gives us every mouthful of food that we eat, and we're part of it. If we're going to damage it, we should stop doing so, and we should learn how to look after it. But if you're away from it and divorced from it, you don't have the chance to know how to do it. So television is a very, very crucial link in allowing people to see what the natural world is and to understand what the natural world is. And I believe that's absolutely crucially important.
I think it's time for another clip on that theme, actually.
Okay. It's apparently quite common amongst rhinos that they have faults with their eyes. And there are others that have been born in captivity which have this problem with the eye, and some of them have been operated on successfully. That little one was inoperable.
Oh no.
There are other examples that have been brought up by game rangers living within the park. They are, of course, subject to predation by lions, and certainly while they're quite small, they are in danger. But rhino eyesight is very poor anyway, and they hear very well and they smell very well, and they can look after themselves as adults. So he may be okay.
I think that this clip, for me, really brings out one of the important ways in which we can engage with the natural world through this kind of programming. And we touched on this earlier about the criticism of anthropomorphizing animals. But I think it's really important to look at them as individuals.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And that was what I meant to say by telling the story about the Cape hunting dogs. I mean, what is extraordinary to me is actually the number of animals that are individual and break all the rules. I mean, take for example, I once made a program about spiders, and I wanted to film a spider called a bolas spider. And the bolas spider hangs upside down from a twig and spins a filament of silk with a little sticky blob on the end. And when the spider hears a moth coming by, with its leg, it starts doing this. And as the moth comes by, it lets go and captures the moth like a bolas. And I wrote this sequence down and gave it to a cameraman, a very good natural history cameraman. I said, that's what we want. And he said, where is it? I said, it's in Georgia, in the middle of the United States. And there's a chap here who will show you where they are. Good luck. See, so off he went. And after about a fortnight, I went up and joined him. And I said, how's it going? And he said, well, come down, I'll show you. And he had, I think, 8 milk bottles, and in each one there was a spray of leafy branch, and on each one there was a female bolas spider. And I said, why have you got so many? He said, it's extraordinary. This spider here is absolutely hopeless. I mean, if you make the slightest noise, she won't do anything at all. This one, if you show a light, she won't do anything. He doesn't care what noise you make, but the light is that one. This one is just bone idle. I mean, I can't do that. But that one, will feed every time you release a moth nearby. So, here are 8 spiders, each tiny little creatures like that, and they have individual characters, you see. Extraordinary. And it's a bit of a lesson to you, that we think we are so marvellous because we're all so different. And I'm not suggesting that spiders are quite as diverse as we are. But animals are much more individual than you know. And animal keepers will tell you with that. I mean, people in zoos know that perfectly well. It's just, if I may say so, scientists who tend to say, no, come on, we don't want this subjective, because you think that one's lovable and that one is rather untrustworthy. That's not science. Scientists don't say that anymore, do they?
No, they don't. It is
to.
fascinating because you get powerful results from studies which include lots of individuals, but you shouldn't lose sight of the fact at the same time that those are lots of individuals. And what you're talking about is variation. It's the stuff of evolution. You know, we wouldn't have evolution if there wasn't variation within species like that. But I think we tend to think of animals in terms of archetypes. So we tend to have an idea of a spider or a frog, or even a particular species of frog, rather than trying to appreciate the variation that there is out there.
Yes, I mean, and of course one of the big problems of biology now really is what is the nature of a species, which is next door in the Natural History Museum with everybody creating new names and new species and so on, which is, you've got to start somewhere. You've got to have some kind of classification. But animals are more variable than many people think.
And you've got some species named after you, I think.
Yes. Yes, I have.
Which is your favourite of those?
Favourite of them?
Yes.
Oh, well, I can tell you. There's a plesiosaur. And a plesiosaur which was discovered in Lyme Regis in the middle of the 19th century. It's called Plesiosaurus coniberi. And of course, as people here will know, particularly amongst fossils, you find a backbone, and you decide it's got to have a name, and you give it a name. And then you may find a jaw with teeth in it, and that's going to have a name. And then another one's going to have a bit of a paddle or something. And then after you've been collecting these things for maybe 50, 60, 70 years, then it's time to look at a whole lot and see whether they all belong to one another and whether you're going to have a new name or whatever. And unbeknown to me, an American paleontologist looked at Plesiosaurus coniberi and decided that it was very much different from all other plesiosaurs. And he decided it was so different, it had to have not only a new specific name, a new genus. See? So it was no longer Plesiosaurus, he called it Attenboroughsaurus. Fantastic, see? So, well, the only snag about this was that Attenboroughsaurus, or Plesiosaurus coniberi, existed in the Bristol Museum, and the only specimen was there, see? And Hitler dropped a bomb on it. But there was a very good plaster cast of it in the Natural History Museum, see, hanging on the wall. And I thought, well, there we are, but it was still called Plesiosaurus. So I said to the head of the paleontology department, are you ever going to change this? I mean, Plesiosaurus. And he said, well, not until we get more money to redecorate the gallery, and we only did it about 25 years ago, so I suppose it'd be another 25 years. But however, about a couple of years after this, it did change the name. So I go into the Natural History Museum, and it's above me, you see. And I think someone's surely going to walk by and say, Attenboroughsaurus.
Yes.
Not at all.
No.
So I just moved on.
That's wonderful. Right, I think it's time to invite some questions from the audience now. We have roving microphones, I think, around. So there we go. Now I can see you, which is brilliant. So the easiest way to do this is put your hands up as though it was a massive classroom, and a roving microphone will appear at your side. So there's a lady in a green top with her hand up in the air here, in the second row from the front. And you can start. And I've also got some questions from Twitter, because the Society of Biology was tweeting earlier this afternoon and asking people what they wanted to hashtag Ask Attenborough.
Is it working? Okay, right. Hey, David. I'm very glad to be here. I'm a fan of your documentaries for many, many years. I started making nature documentaries as well, especially about birds. I'm from the Netherlands. Came all the way to see you, and I would like to know how, at this time, start working for BBC as a wildlife narrator, like what you are doing. But you're doing it for so long, so everyone likes what you are doing, and I would like to do the same, but how to get in?
I'll tell you how to make a nature documentary. It has never been easier, ever, to make a documentary than it is now. 25 years ago, 60 years ago when I started, it was very difficult. We had all sorts of technical problems. Now, home movies, home video is very, very simple to do. It's very simple to edit it if you've got a computer. Go and make your own movie. And it doesn't matter how common the animal is, whether it's a squirrel or an earthworm, or whatever, you'll find out how to make natural history program. Go and have a go.
So, sorry, we need to move on to another question now. There's a lady in the fourth row back there. Can we get the roving microphone to her, please? Can we get the roving microphone to the lady in the fourth row just there with her hand up? Thank you.
Hello, hi Sir David. Again, a huge fan. You've inspired my entire life. Became a zookeeper myself. I just want to know, really, you've travelled worldwide filming thousands and thousands of species. Do you have a favourite place in the world that you like to visit, and why?
Well, if it's a place to visit, my favourite place in the world is absolutely clear, is where I live. I mean, but if you're talking about going to visit somewhere, a place I enjoy visiting a lot is Borneo. And the Southeast Asian rainforest is very much less known popularly than South American or indeed African. And there are fabulous things in Southeast Asia and in Borneo in particular. So yes, Borneo is the place for me.
Thank you. And another one on this side, there's a lady in the third row there with her hand up, black top. Here comes the microphone.
Hello, hi Alice, and hi Sir David. I just wanted to know what helps you to stay positive and encouraged in the face of humanity's impact on the world? What helps you to overcome that?
Well, I don't think it's going to get anything done to spend your time saying everything is hopeless. And I am persuaded that things might be just a little bit better if you do something than if you do nothing. You have an obligation to do that. And I wouldn't be able to look my grandchildren in their eyes if they said to me, "Look, grandfather, you knew what was happening in the world and you did nothing." I couldn't do that, and no, things are terrible. It is true they are terrible, but you know there are much more awareness in the world. Year by year, the awareness becomes great. There were times 30 years ago when pretty well everybody except biologists and scientists denied the existence of climate change. America now, I mean, there are still opposition to it in the States, but they are coming through. China have come to understand that you've got to do something about climate. It may be too late, and then we may be that we're going to lose lots of things. Okay, but we really have an obligation to do something about it and to talk about it.
This actually feeds into one of the questions that came through on Twitter, which was a similar kind of theme, which was faced with what we know is going to be inevitable climate change, whatever we can do to mitigate it now, and ongoing habitat loss. Are there any particular success stories or particular projects which give you hope, which make you think actually we can do something about this?
Not many. No, there are not many. But it's true that there are species that are now surviving that would have disappeared had there not been a band of dedicated conservationists to protect them. I mean, the mountain gorillas is one absolute example which I happen to have personal knowledge of. Whatever it was 30 years ago, you know, they were down to a very small number. And dedicated people have worked there, and they are now made them a key part of the nation of Rwanda's economic plan. And so the Rwandese protect those gorillas as they've never been protected before, because they are crucial to Rwanda's economy. So yes, there are those sort of things. The worry, I mean, there are just wholesale problems. The thing that worries me almost more than anything, really, is what is happening to the oceans. The acidification of the oceans and the rise in temperature of the oceans is on the way to cause major problems of depopulation of the fish stocks, for example. And if you even just take the selfish attitude of what does that do to human beings, it robs vast numbers of people of their livelihood, of food. So the problems we're going to face in the oceans is very considerable.
We'll take a question now from this side, as I've been over that side a little bit. So there's a gentleman about halfway down the auditorium there with his hand up. The microphone is coming to you right now.
Hi, Sir David. First, I'd like to thank you for sort of opening my eyes to the world. It's been a very important part of my life. But I was wondering, looking to the future of naturalistic television, would it be better to perhaps have an explicit conservation message as opposed to the one of just direct wonder inspiring stewardship for the world? And I was just wondering what power you think naturalistic television has to change the world for the better going forward.
I think that television has got the responsibility of making sure that there are a whole range of different kinds of television programs. It's absolutely certainly the case that there are overt programs which talk about the dangers and what should be done. They must be there, and I believe they are there, but they can't be there every week. What can be there every week is programs that are bringing the natural world to the attention of a whole range of people and get them interested, because nobody's going to care about protecting the natural world unless they know nothing about it. And the television can light insight and affection and respect for the natural world, which is absolutely crucial if people are going to save it. And you can't spend every program that you do wagging your finger and saying it's all disastrous and it's all your fault. You know, you have a responsibility, as I was saying earlier, of bringing the natural world into the front room of people who otherwise would never see it, and persuading them that it is so important that it has to be saved, and then the moment comes they will do something about it. And that is happening more and more and more. In my experience, 50 years ago, nobody cared tuppence for conservation, really, except a few dedicated specialists. Now, everywhere, and particularly young people everywhere, are on fire about protecting the natural world. And that is a major change and one source of hope. The problem is that we have to tackle the problem at root, and that's the difficulty.
And I don't want to neglect people right at the top and at the back, so I think there's a lady with her hand up right up there. Yes, yeah.
Hi, I just want to say thank you to both of you, because you've both been an inspiration to me. And I just wondered, I watched your programme called Attenborough's Ark, and if there was one animal that had already gone extinct, would you save? What would you choose to save and why?
If an animal was...
If there was, do you mean an animal that's already extinct now?
Yes, an animal that's already gone extinct.
So amongst all the animals that have already gone extinct, which one would you like to bring back?
How far can I go back? If you allow me to go back to, 75 million years, there was a thing called Quetzalcoatlus, which was a pterosaur. That's to say, it was related to the dinosaurs, but it flew. It had wings, and it was, I think it was 60 feet across. It was the size of a small monoplane, much bigger than any bird that exists today. I would just absolutely, and I would absolutely love to see that for a number of reasons. Its biology is extraordinarily mysterious. How did it get into the air in the first place with these enormous wings? How much could it flap? And another odd thing about it was that its vertebrae and its cervical vertebrae, its neck vertebrae, actually locked together, so it had a pole, like a rigid pole for a neck. What was that for? I think I know, you see. Because around on the ground beneath it, there were all these huge, great brontosaurs and diplodocus and so on, like those next door. And if you watch animals on the plains of Africa, of course, the first thing they do is to rip open the side and then the animal, and then poke their head inside, like vultures do, in order to pull out the guts. But if you've got a diplodocus the size of this room, you need an enormous long neck, like a pole. I think that's what the neck was for. Yearned to find out. Absolutely fascinating.
But you might have to bring back one of the big herbivores as well at the same time. Put them both in the environment.
So. I hadn't thought of that.
Sounds utterly terrifying. There's a woman close towards the back there in the middle of the row. Sorry about this. It takes a while for the microphone to come across. So while the microphone's going across, I know that you enjoy conversing with animals. If you could have a proper conversation with an animal, this is another question from Twitter, which one and why?
I mean, to take the question quite seriously, I don't believe it would be possible for you to have a comprehensible, mutually comprehensible conversation with, let us say, with a python. I don't think you could have a conversation with a gorilla. I mean, the gorilla has all kinds of ways in which human beings that live in the same sort of society, and we see the world the same way, and so on. That sort of. So you could converse with a gorilla, and you could find out how much communication is, and you could have a meaningful conversation with a gorilla. But with a python, which sleeps for 9 months of the year, it just sits there waiting, and it's going to say, well, November, and any luck next March, we might something like come along. Well, I think that would be a limited conversation.
The gorilla would be much more entertaining. Yeah. So, have you got the microphone? Lovely.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. I'm a biology teacher, and I just wonder if Sir David had a message that I could take back to my children that I teach at secondary school age.
I didn't catch that.
The lady asking the question is a biology teacher. Have you got something that she can take back to her class who is secondary school?
You mean a message?
A message, yeah.
Well, only the messages which I'm sure you give them anyway, which is look after this earth, because it's the only one we've got, and we're part of it. That's the only message I can, really. But I just hope that your school manages to have something in the playground which will allow children to see a pond skater, a newt, just some little ecosystem like you get in the pond. And I know the pressure in schools is huge with playgrounds. I'm involved with a number of charities which are trying to get ponds and natural world into the playground instead of tarmac, which is what I played on when I was an 8-year-old. But I know equally well Now, because of the rise in the population, the pressure on the schools is such, they are told to have bigger classes or more classes, and where are they going to put all the extra children? The only place they have is the playground. So those precious little ecosystems, which can be a children's first introduction to creatures other than human beings that are alive on this earth, are under great hazards, under great pressure, great danger. So it's tough, I know, but I hope we manage it.
And again, particularly in cities, when we're thinking about urban living.
Yes, but you see, almost everybody is urban in Britain today. I mean, almost everybody, that's obviously an exaggeration. But I mean, 60%, 70% of people living in built-up areas. And a number of village schools are very small.
So we need to make sure there are green spaces in our cities.
Certainly so.
But also green spaces in our schools or very close to our schools.
That's right, that's right.
There's a lady in a bright blue shirt, obviously worn, designed to catch our attention.
Hello. I asked my animal and equine degree students who they would like to invite out for dinner, and you're frequently near the top of that list. I wonder who would feature on your list.
Who's on my list?
Yes, who would you like to invite to dinner?
Living or dead? Anybody?
It doesn't matter.
Human
either.
or not?
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, I mean, I don't have any doubt about that. And I mean, any biologist, I'll bet you $1, any biologist in this theatre would say that the one person you really want to talk to is Charles Darwin. I mean, it's an obvious answer, I'm afraid, but it's the truth one. I mean, you think of any problem that you've got, and before you start theorising, so just you check up whether Charles Darwin mentioned it in one of those little green octavo books. I say little, fat octavo books in green cloth, sitting on your shelf, whether it's earthworms, whether it's human gestures, or whether it's the origin of species. The observations that man made and put down in absolutely comprehensible terms are unbelievable. And he touched on so many subjects which we even now are still exploring. I had the nerve the other day, I had to say I thought it was sort of slightly outrageous somewhere or other. I said, of course, birds have an aesthetic sense. I mean, female birds actually judge a bird of paradise, male bird of paradise, by beauty, and not by function. Some birds use function, terns. Male terns will give female terns food or fish, but female birds of paradise simply judge a male on the splendour of his plumes. And I thought that was rather a bold thing to say. Not at all. Charles Darwin said it. He said birds have an aesthetic sense, are the most aesthetic sensitive of any non-human animal that he knows. Fantastic thing to say, 100 years ago.
Wonderful. So you're sitting down to dinner with Charles Darwin and perhaps touching on birds of paradise. Is there anybody else you'd like to invite along as well? How about bringing Wallace into the room?
Oh, well, that would be cheating slightly, because it would be the same, but I agree with you. I mean, I'm a great fan of Wallace. But having said that, interesting to reflect on what the earlier question was, or my answer to it, is that actually Wallace denied that birds of paradise, that any birds had aesthetic. He refused to accept that birds would have an aesthetic sense. So, although I think Wallace was one of the most, perhaps the most remarkable tropical traveller that I know of. Humboldt, I suppose, comes pretty close. And okay, I'll pick Humboldt, because Humboldt was the last polymath. There was no aspect of the natural world, geology, meteorology, volcanology, entomology, anthropology, no aspect of it that he wasn't curious about, as he wrote about in Cosmos. I mean, that is an extraordinary book.
Sounds like a good dinner party. I'd like to know if Samuel, aged 8, is in the audience.
There he is.
Because I know he's got a question. Can Can we get the microphone to you? Hang on a minute, Samuel. Here comes the microphone.
Hi, I'm Samuel. I was wondering which of your programs you would like to which you would like making the most again.
Well, I'm afraid it's a rather boring answer, but it's, if you really want the truthful, and I know you want me to speak the truth of the matter is that I'm potty about birds of paradise. And it may have been occurred from the previous question. But I am besotted. I love birds of paradise. I love watching birds of paradise. They only live in this wonderful island of New Guinea, which is a huge island. It's 1,000 miles long. But watching birds of paradise display is one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen in my life, and I'd like to go on doing it.
Fantastic. There's a gentleman right at the front here in a blue shirt.
David, I'm a journalist from The Guardian. My name's Carl Matheson. I just wanted to ask you, with news on Mozambique's elephant population today being halved in the last 5 years, do you think that the poaching crisis now represents a mortal threat to Africa's megafauna, and can they possibly survive?
Do I think that the African megafauna can survive?
Yes, given the poaching crisis and the decimation of the Mozambique elephant population. You have to assume it's a possibility. You have to assume that. I am not going to say we don't care about protecting rhinos or elephants or whatever, make of the megafauna. Because if you said, yes, they're going to all die within the next 10 years, that you would stop trying to protect them, and they would die within the next 10 years. Because if there weren't dedicated people around the world who are caring for the African megafauna, it would go like that. Of course it would, if only because people eat it. And no good they're wanting to sell ivory as another part, but they want space and so on. So you have to protect it. So there has to be a chance that there is. And I will go on working on that basis. I think to just say no, it's going to go, and wash your hands of it would be awful. Awful. And from the point of view of presumably what countries can do, developed countries giving developing countries help to do that is important. What about individuals? What about all of us? I mean, we know about these animals, we see them on television, you introduce us to them. What can we do to help?
On every level. On every level. You have to support conservation charities. They need that. I mean, I can list them if you wish, but it's unfair because I won't be able to list them all, because there are lots of them, all working hard and valuably, and the world would be a much poorer place if they weren't those things. And so they require our help. But also, if you're living in a democracy, which we are, you have to support the government and insist that the government themselves take a view about their ecological responsibilities. And you demand that. You must demand that from our politicians, because in the end, it has to be a global solution. We can only international solutions. It's no good protecting or very, very little use protecting one small corner of an ocean. In the end, the whole ocean has to be protected, because what goes on here is going to have an effect on what goes on the other side of the ocean. So we have to have global determination to protect the globe, and that can only come by international agreement. I mean, there are signs that that's happening. It's not all gloom. It's not all disaster. We have greater success now than we had 30 years ago. The problem is we have greater problems too. That is a problem, because of the increase in population and because of the way in which the planet is heating up. So the problems are getting greater. We are, as a species, more energized in doing something about it than we have ever been. but the problems are increasing too.
I'd like to take another question from this side, and there's a lady in the fourth row back there with her hand up.
There was these programs about animals with feelings, and does it links to what you two said earlier about how we would all view animals as individuals, you know?
If you are suggesting that so what we do about what's called anthropomorphism, about crediting animals with human characteristics, of course we do, because to some degree we, and anthropomorphic people, we are the only things we really know about anger and sex and terror and so on. And you can see perfectly well, if an elephant comes charging at you at 20 miles an hour with its ears out and trumpeting a noise, take my word from it, he's angry. Now, anger is a human characteristic too, and it is because of what we know about anger ourselves that we can say that elephant is angry. But there are some things where you cannot take that kind of parallel. I mean, if you see an elephant which is turning over bones of a dead elephant, it is tempting to say, and it may be right, it is tempting to say that that elephant is thinking about the old elephant that died here. That is anthropomorphic. You have no evidence that that is the case, but you can suggest it, but it is anthropomorphism to say that's what's happening. So there's justified anthropomorphism and there's unjustified anthropomorphism.
And I think that sometimes we forget that humans are animals too.
That's quite so too.
I'd like to start to wrap up. There's a question from Twitter here which I would really like to ask you, which is, do you think that high quality natural history broadcasting, and I'd like to add with a strong sense of responsibility, would that continue if the BBC becomes a mostly commercial entity?
Well, even if it doesn't become commercial, it's a question as well, it's going to continue. The fact of the matter is that, though I say it myself, I mean, you and I both are in this business, so we know, the quality of natural history filming now is better than it has ever been. But the reason it is better is that there's a lot of money being spent upon it. That time is spent making good natural history programs. Multiple crews spend hours, days, weeks, years in the field just to get a particular shot. That takes money. The moment the BBC is right up there and is able to sell its programs around the world, in America and Russia, in Hungary, all over the place, and that's fine. But if the BBC became commercial, and the size of its money that it spent was dependent upon how big the audience was, then you are in trouble, because it's very much easier to get a large audience for little money with different kinds of programs. Television and good natural history programs cost a lot of money. So if in fact the BBC is starved of money or becomes dependent upon the size of its audience for money, which is a similar way of saying it, then I think the natural history programs, quality natural history programs, will be in great danger, yes.
And I'd just like to finish with some quick fire questions, Sir David. You're not allowed to explain your answers. You just have to choose one or the other.
27. You give me the question.
Proboscis or howler monkey?
Big pardon?
Proboscis monkey or howler monkey?
Oh, proboscis monkey.
Komodo dragon or saltwater crocodile?
Oh, Komodo dragon.
Rattlesnake or tarantula?
Rattlesnake.
Darwin or Wallace?
Oh, Darwin.
Bird of paradise or robin?
Oh,
Robin.
I don't care what it was. Bird of paradise.
Paraguayan harp or gamelan?
Oh, gamelan.
Thank you very much, Sir David Attenborough. thank you very much for your wonderful questions as well tonight. And it's now my pleasure to invite on stage Professor Dame Jean Thomas, who is President of the Society of Biology. He's going to conclude the evening's proceedings.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, I'm quite sure of one thing, that I can safely thank our speakers for this evening, because we've had an amazing and wonderful and a unique experience. There are many people to thank for this, but first and foremost, Sir David Attenborough and Professor Alice Roberts. They've been a wonderful combination. We knew they would be. I think David Attenborough, whether he likes it or not, and maybe he doesn't like it, but he is a much loved, revered and respected national treasure. I think we... When Alice grows up, as it were, she may be heading in the same direction. I think if she keeps going, she's at risk of becoming a national treasure. I work in Cambridge, and we're very excited there because there is a new building under construction right in the heart of Cambridge. It's going to house the Cambridge Conservation Initiative and the new Museum of Zoology. It's a splendid new building, and Sir David Attenborough has allowed his name to be given to that building, so it would be the Attenborough Conservation Centre. So we're all delighted about that, so thank you for that. Secondly, I would like to thank the Science Museum and the staff for hosting this event and for shepherding us around this cavernous building this evening, making sure no one got lost. So thank you very much for that. And also PricewaterhouseCoopers for sponsoring the event. Very grateful to you, and I'm sure both institutions will be very pleased at the outcome and also at the full house that we have here. I'd like to give these thanks are all on behalf of the Society of Biology. I'd like to give my personal thanks to the staff of the Society of Biology who conceived this idea, which has been a tremendous success, and who organised, did a lot of hard work in organising the whole event and making sure that it's actually come to fruition in this way. And thank you, of course, the audience as well. So before we disband, I have one pleasant duty, and that is, these lights are so bright. Pleasant duty, there's Penny. Someone has got a small token of appreciation from the Society's council and staff for Sir David and Professor Roberts. And this is a bottle of wine and a card. And I should say a bottle of wine each and a card. I did ask with some trepidation whether this was decent wine, and I was told not to worry, that it's rather a good bottle. So here we are. Oh, I need two hands. That's all right, I can do that. Thank you. Splendid. Right, thank you very much. So, enjoy.
Thank you very much.
And Alice.
Thank you very much. That's lovely. Thank you.
And David has one additional gift, and at this point I'm going to call on Jenny Webber, who's here somewhere. Here you are. Jenny is a natural history illustrator, and she has produced a pocket square on which are printed her own illustrations of the 7 extant species that are named, never mind the fossils, that are named after Sir David Attenborough. Now, I hoped we'd have a slide here, but we don't have the slide because that thought came to me too late. But this is going to be up on the Society of Biology website, and probably it'll be tweeted as I speak, and people will be able to see it. It's a really splendid thing, and while you're admiring it, I should... The species are a pitcher plant, a tree with geometric leaves, this lovely guy in the middle, the long-beaked echidna, a ghost shrimp, Indonesian weevil, Solanona plant, and Attenborough's hawkweed. So they're a wonderful collection.
Thank you very much.
And I think that concludes the formal part of the evening.